You will get to see the Discord in action because we actually have that up now. You get to see new Discord thing.
Hooray for
Ray.
you can do it, Discord.
All right. I'll go ahead and close that out. And now we start. Hello, everybody. Welcome. It is the Freelancer here with my good buddy Jake.
Yo.
We're doing some different stuff. Very different compared to what I normally do. A lot of my channel has mostly consisted of gaming stuff, but Jake is here to join me on a brand new adventure. Isn't that right?
Brand new adventure.
Yeah. Totally has never been done before.
Never. We're carving new paths.
Carving new paths in the way of lore weaving, or lore explanation rather, because
content creation.
Content creation. Because we are here, and we're playing with the idea of a podcast dedicated to some lore stuff. Our name is, I feel like, still pending, but for right now, is the Dark Council podcast, and we are going to be playing around with. We're gonna be playing around with Star Wars lore, of which I am adversely, I'd say, more high level, but I wouldn't say like expertly versed on a lot of it. I've got a very vast knowledge, mostly due to bored Wikipedia scrolls back in my early days.
That's how everybody learns.
A lot of people learn, because if you don't learn that way, you learn through the books, and it's the other reason I kind of learn a lot of my stuff. I learn a lot through that. I learn a lot through my story. Learn a lot through that stuff, but we're gonna play with the idea here of that. And our first little topic, because we will be doing these as like, each one is gonna be streamed. We'll stream these off. They'll go off to YouTube, and we'll get to play around with. We'll get to kind of discuss these, and there'll be random topics. They're not going to be anything. There'll be some specific stuff, more open topic stuff. But for first topic, Jake has already been made aware of what we're doing. And I've already got the next topic that will be revealed later. Today's topic will be for the infamous clone commandos of the Galactic Republic's military. Specifically, we will be doing both coverages on the Disney canon side and the Legend side. Not necessarily in that order. A lot of it will be, we'll open off with the Legend side, and we will cover the canon stuff. We get to kind of break apart everything, and I'll give some topics of defense in some of them, and then in others, both me and Jake will get to rip Disney apart for what they've done.
It'll turn from a Star Wars fan cast to a Disney hate cast.
No, Jake, don't you understand? As Star Wars fans, we always have something to hate.
Yeah, it's true.
There's always something to hate as a Star Wars fan, and I hate to be the one to kind of like publicly advocate that, but I'm sorry, it's true. You're never gonna have something that you don't hate with Star Wars, but you're also not gonna have something you don't like with Star Wars.
Star Wars fans love to hate.
Star Wars fans love to hate. It's the unfortunate reality we live in. And I guess 40K is kind of the same way. You got your haters and you've got your people who have their like die-hard aspect. But Clone Commandos. So before we get into this, I know I've talked to this about. I know I've asked you a couple questions. You do not have as much knowledge of this topic as I originally expected.
No.
So most people will probably recognize the Clone Commandos more infamously from stuff like the Bad Batch TV show, the Clone Wars TV show, and of course the more infamous, probably the one that recognizes them the most, in my opinion, the Republic Commandos video game from, was it 2005? Like 2004, 2005.
Yeah.
During that glorious era of Star Wars games under LucasArts. Before the dark times.
Yeah.
It's yeah.
Yeah.
But so let's kind of be getting into it, because most of these are probably gonna be me discussing with Jake about the topics in general, because he's not got a lot. He has knowledge of Star Wars stuff, but there's stuff that he does not have as much of as I do. So a lot
I
of
have
this is
broad stroke knowledge. I don't have anything that's like pinpoint, like, oh, I know about this. I know a lot about a varied amount of topics, but none of them.
You don't have anything like deep like I would.
No. You
have the enough to be baseline conversational. Other than that, you don't have a lot.
Correct.
So, they're the hiccups. Damn it. People know I have the fucking hiccups like the first 15 minutes into the streams. I always end up with hiccups. And a lot of it, and that's why I fucking keep a water bottle on hand at all times, just to fucking keep that shit down.
Okay, you can't really hold your breath when you're doing an audio medium.
Nope. Absolutely not. So, a little brief summary on the Clone Commandos, otherwise recognized as the Republic Commandos in Legends. They're an elite group of specially trained, specially equipped, specially bred clones, and while these are the one that are more recognized, they do have a predecessor group and even a successor group. The clone troopers that knew of the Clone Commandos really didn't actually know a lot about them. A lot of the Clone Commandos were actually supposed to be like deep infiltration, black ops, special task force squads. Typically, you'd see them in groups of 4 deployed out in mass to take on like harder objectives in deep enemy environment, where it would be it'd be more costly to send a whole squad to. Deploy a whole platoon versus throw 4 guys at a problem and watch the problem get absolutely wrecked. Because that's what the Clone Commandos were meant for. They were supposed to be the best of the best. And in a large part, they were. So obviously, they do have their own differences in lore between their Legends and canon paths. Both during and after, especially before. But they were given a lot of really cool, powerful equipment, some of which was actually not even standard Republic issued stuff, like DC-15 and everything like that. You wouldn't see in Legends. You would not actually see a lot of. You would see a lot of them wielding most of the same armament, but you would have a couple instances where they'd have some special, like, non-standard weaponry. They are, of course, as mentioned, most famously recognized through the Republic Commando video game. They have also been featured in various novels and a bunch of couple comics from both Dark Horse and Marvel. Because I know Marvel had some older publishings for Star Wars comics, but Dark Horse obviously is the big one most people from Legends would recognize for comic lines. And the other one where you'd see another instance of them being recognized is the Clone Wars TV series and the Bad Batch TV series. So let's so that's kind of the brief rundown. There's gonna be a lot going into this one as we go into the history. So obviously you are aware the whole ABY BBY thing.
Yes.
So the Clone Commandos official history would begin 10 years prior to the start of the Clone Wars. So roughly about 32 BBY.
Okay, so this would be when they were being commissioned?
This would be during their commission process. This would be when they're being commissioned and trained.
Okay.
So they would first see 10-year. They would receive over 10 years roughly of training, essentially. The commission would begin like 10 years prior, but before we actually get into when the Clone Commandos officially get their deployment, we do have to talk about their predecessors a bit.
Okay.
So when the commission for the Clone Army started, Jango Fett obviously was hired by Darth Tyrannus, Count Dooku, to become the template for the Clone Army. And with the Bounty Hunter game actually having released, with a remaster of that having released, most people can actually see how that whole recruitment process comes about. So I won't go into any detail about that. People get to play that and see that for themselves. We'll probably be streaming that at some point, by the way, because I do like the Bounty Hunter video game. But that is where Jango Fett's origin in Legends, to where he meets Dooku and where he joins up with the project for the Kaminoan cloning, kind of comes about. When they were originally commissioning the army, Jango brought up the prospect of the clones needing some kind of special forces. He thought about the idea that there needed to be a group of outlier clones in this army. Those that were better trained, more highly skilled than most of the other clones, and could perform with less orthodox methods than more unorthodox methods than what a normal clone would be privy to. Those that could act in a snap situation, essentially.
Much like real commandos.
Much like real commandos are supposed to.
Okay.
In this instance, the Kaminoans were against his being the one to personally train them. So obviously, I don't know if you know or not, but the clones were Kaminoans are very stuck in their ways. Like, they had their own doctrine when it came to processing clones. They were very elitist about doing it their way or nobody's way. But because of the biggest commission of their lives, they kind of had to make a bit of a. They kind of made a bit of a deal with Django. Django brought up the idea to train the first batch of clones themselves. And this is not the Bad Batch or any of the ones like Delta Squad or any of those.
This is before them, right?
This is before them.
Okay.
So the obvious secondary elite force that most people from the Clone Wars TV series especially would recognize is the ARC Troopers.
Oh, I know
But
those dudes.
the ARC Troopers in Legends had their own special outlier. And this is the predecessors of the clone commandos, the Null Arcs, who most would.
That's a dope ass name.
The Null Arcs were referred to as the Null Arcs because when they were originally trained, because of a lot of the training that they did and a lot of the upbringing from Django, they actually turned out a lot more aggressive and leaned towards more solo operating rather than becoming a big unit like what they had planned for this project. Instead of becoming more of a cohesive unit, they were very lone soldier type. Django's training had a lot to do with this because Django himself was a bounty hunter. He was a Mandalorian, he was a bounty hunter. But that was kind of just going to happen anyway. The null part of the name for these elite groups comes with the fact that the Kaminoans saw them as defective. The Nullarks were deemed defective because of their irrational tendencies. Because the clones were supposed to be, they would follow orders nearly without question. Like, these were supposed to be the loyal army that the Republic could rely on, and what we would know later would be willing to even commit mass genocide.
Oh, rip the youngling.
So the clone commandos were commissioned under the Kaminoans' prerogative. Obviously, Django's personal bid did not fall through, but the Nullarks were not officially cast off. Most of them would actually see a lot of roles later. One of the biggest ones I think I can list off without getting much into detail on it would actually be from the Genndy Tarkovsky Clone Wars movies. The elite group of ARC troopers that is featured there are a group of Nullarks known as the Munilist 10.
Also a dope name.
The Munilist 10 basically earned that name after the Battle of Munilist and were led by one Sergeant Fordo. Fordo was very much a elite soldier, but at the same time, he also was one that was very adaptable to a situation. If there were any Nullark that actually fits the clone commando mentality, Fordo is one. He never actually preceded that because obviously he still carried a lot of Django's mentality with him, but that's where the clone commandos differed, as they would receive a lot of the same training, but more developed and unique. This also being because when part of their training would come about for combat, they would be trained by a group that Django personally hired called the Kai Baldar, a group of elite mercenaries and Mandalorians who worked under Django prior to his commission as the clone template. These were the men and women who would go on to train the clones in large part, specifically the clone commandos. And this is kind of where the difference in training shows. So the Kai Valdar made a lot of effort to train. They trained the Mandalorian. They trained him with the Mandalorian mindset. So a lot of like unity with each other, but also putting in a lot of competition between the clone commandos. So their training was not as regulated as the clone troopers, and a lot of it, which I'll get into later, was very brutal, as you'd expect from Mandalorian training. Unlike the arcs, they did come out. Unlike the arcs and the by-the-book clone troopers, the clone commandos would be raised together, usually as a unit of 4, commonly referred to as a pod. The squads of commandos would each have their own differences and would become a bigger unit. The mentality they were taught with was they were not as worthwhile on their own, but together they were the elite.
Okay.
Their property, their biggest factor came up as a unit of cohesion. And this is kind of the training that they would go through while receiving the standard flash training in early years, to basically accelerate their minds, as most
Okay. So
clones had received.
so that would be the whole like in the prequels you see them
You see
like
like the little kids on the consoles and everything kind of
yeah.
tapping away there. Yeah, that's what the actual Republic Commandos game shows off, like a lot of the parts of the training. Like
Gotcha.
you actually see what it looks like, seeing the like holographic displays kind of flashing back and forth, showing off the weaponry that you're expected to utilize, the command structure, the enemies that you're supposed to be fighting.
Yeah. Brainwashing child soldiers.
Yep. Yep. Throwing 9-year-old adult men into combat.
That oh, I don't like the way that's phrased. Not a fan of that.
It's the worst part is it's the truest way I could describe it.
That's gross.
Because you got to think about it. They're flash grown, essentially. Like, they're
Yeah.
not slow grown like Boba was. They are grown to be grown and raised over a course of like 5 to 10 years. Because the largest pools of them were over that 10-year span that I mentioned before.
Yeah.
But the later parts would be more flash grown to adjust to the rising demand for more soldiers.
Okay, so they would grow faster.
They had to accelerate their training just a little bit, so that was kind of where that second generation of clones came up. That's kind of the phase 2 project.
Okay.
But
okay.
Obviously that's kind of just loose term. It's not entirely how that goes. It's just kind of loose term. That's what they were doing.
Yeah.
Because obviously big wars going on, your supply of soldiers is being dropped by the dozens. So, but speaking of where that actually starts, shifting from where their training kind of changes up, their upbringing starts their official first deployment, what a lot of clones commonly considered 0 hour. The Battle of Geonosis would be one of the most brutal first engagements until the battles of Seleucami in Legends, or even the Battle of Umbara that we see in the Clone Wars TV show.
Cool.
Geonosis had been one of the bloodiest battles that the clones would be thrown into for their first deployment. And when the clones were deployed, well, the larger armies were sent to basically attack the droids in large front. The clone commandos would be deployed on various missions to sabotage separatist infrastructure that would cripple the Confederacy for the foreseeable part of the war. Droid foundries, core ships, and in some cases, even some of their notable leadership. Such was the case for Delta Squad's first mission on the planet, the assassination of the Geonosian lieutenant known as Sun Fac.
What a dumb.
The battle itself was obviously a very bloody one. A lot of Jedi would not act. Was actually kind of a big reason that the clone commandos would suffer a lot later in the war, was because the Jedi initially would not be able to tell the difference between them and the common clone. Initially, they were not able to differentiate them apart from the common soldier because the Jedi couldn't tell one way or the other anyway.
They're clones. Most people probably couldn't tell the difference.
I mean, even most of the clones wouldn't really know. Because, like I said, the clone commandos were a rumor amongst even the more common clones.
Mm-hmm.
They were basically a story about the elite of the elite. They were the biggest one that comes as an actual quote from the Republic Commando game is when one of the clones actually when you actually approach a like holdout position in a tunnel. One of the standard clone troopers sees boss approaching, and he calls out to to one of the other clones that's next to him, and he's like, "Hey, check it out, 3-5 commandos!" And he responds with, "They're anything as good as I hear. They can practically win the war themselves." The clone commandos very much had the status of being more or less on par with even the Jedi in terms of their scale. Like, these would have been guys who could have taken out Jedi if given the opportunity. And we'll get to
Foreshadowing
that.
is foreshadowing is an element of literature.
But due to the big confusion amongst the differentiation, roughly 50% of the total commando teams that were initially deployed to the Battle of Geonosis would be lost in that same conflict. And
That's rough.
those that survived would be going on to become infamous members of the Clone Army and taking on various other operations. When I actually talk about, when we get to some of them later, because there are a few of the squads that I do want to discuss in their own like separate stories.
Okay.
We'll get to talk about some of the more notable ones later, like Delta and Omega Squad are two probably big ones that a lot of people recognize.
Which one's the one from the game?
That is Delta Squad.
Okay.
Delta Squad is the one that is one people will most recognize aside from like the Bad Batch.
Not to be confused with Delta Force, the actual commando units.
Yeah, that totally wasn't an inspiration there, was it?
No, not at all.
Not at all. So we jump ahead jump ahead a little bit. The war is obviously still going on, but obviously the clones are not gonna be perfect, as most people would recognize. And this is the case of one clone trooper that I have to talk about at least in some part here, because what he does shakes up the entirety of the clones training structure and like what they believe in for the rest of the war. The clone in question that I'm about to mention here is one Alpha 02.
What a name.
So Alpha 02, most people in the deeper community would probably recognize as a one that most people would recognize on large part to the comics that he comes from, because he does actually have his own line of he does have his own like comic story, I think, that details what he did. And this was a nutcase. Like, you think of some rogue clones and what they do. This dude kind of just tops the cake. The only other one that probably comes remotely close is Alpha 17. But that's another story entirely, and he is one that warrants his own video. He's one that actually warrants his own discussion.
I'm going to have a hard time remembering their names.
You're going to have a fun time with this one. There's going to be a lot of names to remember in large part here, but so Alpha 02 would be held captive by the Kaminoans, and he would in fact escape said captivity.
Well, yeah. Wasn't he bred to be a commando?
He was actually an ARC trooper, to be specific.
Oh.
He is one of the few true failures amongst the Null ARC specifically. And Alpha 02 would actually go on to link up with a Mandalorian group known as the Protectors. And then at some point later on in the conflict, Alpha 02 would join the Mandalorian Protectors, returning to his homeworld of Camino on behalf of the Separatist army to attack the clone homeworld.
Crazy.
He would lead not only to the death of countless clones, but the Mandalorian indoctrination that many clones had been set up with throughout like a good year, I think at this point now. When he actually does this, it's been almost a year.
Mm-hmm.
And
Wait, a year since his escape?
since his escape, yes.
Okay.
It was like almost a year since his escape, because the event happens, it's a big fuss. He goes off to the Mandalorian protectors, and then Dooku has them sent off on a siege to Camino to try to take the planet with the aid of the Mandalorian protectors.
That is a crazy anniversary gift.
Yep. But the entire indoctrination and Mandalorian ideology basically crumbles. Like, a lot of the clones' belief in the Mandalorian ways breaks. They completely lose they completely cut ties to any of the Mandalorians that had trained them at that point. They disregard all the ideology that most of them had been indoctrinated with. And for a large part, almost entirely, they would go on to even reject their genetic heritage as clones of Jango.
Wow, okay.
Like, because of what Alpha 02 and the Mandalorian Protectors do, it leaves that big of a scar that they go off and completely cut ties to who their template was. They officially identify as their own individual. They have no bloodline prior to being brought out of the pod, essentially.
That's some okay. Yeah, when I had my teenage rebellion, all I did was let my hair grow out. They're like, "Nah, we're gonna defy our own genetic heritage. Screw you, Mandalorians. Screw you, Jango Dad."
Yeah, he gets up to some fucking wild it's fucked. But the only a big notable casualty that is actually remarked on this is the clones of the Second Airborne Company are ones that are remarked to have lost a large, notable worth of casualties. It is not specified what that number is, but it is only regarded enough that they are ones worth mentioning that they lost a decent number of their ranks.
Mm.
So I won't go into a lot of the big events that come up in between this point and where we're about to head. I will mention some of them. I will give some notable mentions to some of the more infamous points of more specifically the Delta Squad. One specifically the Delta Squad in this one, because while they'll get their own video, they have enough in their repertoire that they are gonna be fine if I mention it here.
Okay.
So, to mention one of the other large parts that goes on between this and then, this and what's about to happen is the clone commandos of Delta Squad's mission to the. So I have to actually. You have to remember the actual ship name here for a moment. But it was an acclimator class. It was an acclimator class assault ship that the clone commandos of Delta Squad had as a home for a temporary while. And the clone acclimator had gone missing for a few months. I think it was roughly 8 months when when the ship finally reemerged. And the ship was in low power mode. It did not appear to have that many bodies on board.
Ghost ship.
Let's see. Yeah, that's actually the name of the operation. Was
Oh,
the
dope.
It was the this one actually leads into one of the bigger battles. This is actually one that leads in one of the bigger battles of the Clone Wars. Um, I'm so freaking trying to find it. Where is? Can I find? Just look for Delta Squad's thing, and then I can use that. Now here it is. The Prosecutor was the name of the ship in question.
Okay. The prosecutor was the ghost ship.
Yes.
Okay.
So the Acclimator Assault Ship Prosecutor had, so it's 367, so over a year at this point, I think. Over a year has been going on since the Acclimator had resurfaced. Delta Squad
Gotcha.
had deployed. They would go on to investigate the ship. They would split up into different sections of the ship, deploying from a special troop carrier, the CR-25. It was a so you know the gunships that the clones ride in, right?
Yeah, the LAATs.
Think about a ship that could carry 2 to 3 of those.
Okay. So I'm just picturing a longer LAAT.
So this is actually a Corellian design. This is a Corellian
Oh, okay.
cruiser.
So it's got a billion engines on the back of it.
It hacked. Believe the actual ship. I can actually pull up a picture of this one. Let me pull up the image, and I
Also,
will.
this is giving me Space Hulk vibes.
I'm gonna pop this out that way I don't have to.
They're like, yes, this ship was lost to the warp for a year, and now we have to go and figure out what's going on with it. But it's Star Wars, so they can't say that shit.
So I'm gonna send this to you.
Okay, okay.
So this is the CR-25. This is the CR-25 troop carrier.
You know what? That looks kind of cool.
Yeah, it is capable of carrying 2 LAATs under its hull, as you can see there. It's got 2 gunships underneath, and it has a side port above it where you can actually hold an entire squad or two, an entire small squadron of clones. You can carry basically 2 whole squads of clones in that thing.
So I have a quick question.
Yes.
How do they get from inside? So this is a space-faring ship, right?
Yes.
Okay.
This is a ship that has orbital capability and hyperspace capability.
How do they get from inside the ship to inside the lats?
So that is one that they. So I do believe the lats are deployed separate. So you can actually attach the lat onto it, and the troops will deploy from the lats, or it's able to move the lats along with it. I don't
Okay,
think
so
it
this
actually
is
moves the
this is more of
gunships.
a this is more of a ferry ship
More of a
where like
ferry ship.
you load up 2 lats and then it hyperspaces them out to where they
Yeah.
need to be, and then okay.
Yeah. Then you deploy them that way.
That makes way more sense.
But in Delta Squad's case, they deployed from the troop carrier itself, literally jumping through the void of space, essentially, to board the ship externally. Because the clone commandos do actually have a vacuum. The clone commando armor is actually vacuum sealed, believe it or not. So it is
Okay,
able to actually survive in space in a zero oxygen environment.
that's cool.
We'll actually talk about it more individually later on, but the operation went with the idea that the entire operation basically went with the mentality of trying to find out what happened, essentially, to the acclimator. What they would come to find out, however, is that a group of Trandoshan slavers had managed to take control of the ship. A group of Trandoshan mercenaries had boarded and overrun the ship.
Oh, those fucking lizards.
And believe me when I will be 100% honest about this, when I first played that mission, when I even first saw it, I shit you not, that was probably one of the scarier missions I ever had to endure in a video game until I would go on to play Dead Space like 5
Really?
years later. Yeah, no, that was the first part of it is very scary because it's one of the only times in the game where you spend like 50% of it alone. You don't have any part of
Oh.
your squad with you because you play the whole game as boss. You play as the squad leader boss, Delta 38.
Okay.
And when you go in, obviously everybody deployed separate. Everyone entered to a different part of the ship to access the individual data cores. The only ones who actually succeeded their objectives beforehand were everyone actually succeeded their objective beforehand, but after a certain point, the squad members would start to fall off. And you don't know initially why. The first one I think who falls off is Fixer. Delta 40 is the first to end up disappearing, I think. His comm just completely cuts. Scorch Delta 62 is the next one. Scorch ends up disappearing, and again, you don't know why. But you actually link up with Delta 07, Sev. You link up with him, and while he's performing his like retrieval of the data core, what you see is Seb gets jumped by a Trandoshan slaver. Trandoshan slavers literally crawl down from the fucking rafters to knock this man down.
I didn't know Trandoshans were like geckos.
They are, dude, they are absolutely fucking wild.
That's
Like
wild.
I said, when I first saw it, it was one of the scarier missions I think I actually thought of. It wasn't like actual horror or anything. It was just like the thought of the being alone in this very dangerous environment on a lone ship out in space was absolutely terrifying to me.
Yeah, it was more suspense than it was.
It was the suspense part
Yeah.
rather than actual like horror. Like
Yeah.
something scary is here. It's the suspense of like at any freaking corner these fucking lizards will jump out at you and fucking try to murk you.
They live in the walls. They're in the goddamn walls.
Yeah, that's basically what I was enduring, and that's what they had to endure. Delta 38 actually manages to get to. He does eventually get through it, and after a moment, after some time of breaking through most of the ship to get the data core that Sev and get the data core that Sev missed. He does eventually link up with Fixer. Fixer ends up meeting up with him, and they go through the rest of the ship and try to link up with the rest of the squad. I think the first ones they encounter, the link up with them, however, occurs right before they encounter a battle droid foundry pod. So an interesting part that the Republic Commandos game does is there is an actual droid spawner machine that will spawn battle droids from it. These things can be hauled out on like grav lifts or mag rails or whatever, and they will sit there and act as deployable pods for battle droids.
Okay, so do they build the droids in the pods, or are
Inside the
they just?
pod,
Oh,
they have an entire like mini foundry inside the pod to
okay.
assemble the droids and then deploy them in ports. And there were 3 variants of these: one for basic B1s, one for super battle droids, and another one that you don't see until you get to Kashyyyk. I think it's when you actually get to the last bits of the prosecutor mission. Is one for destroyer droids.
Oh, that's no good.
Yeah, it was rough, and the only way you can actually destroy them is by using a special like explosive charge. You have to actually go up and mount an explosive charge on it, and that's the only way you can blow it up.
Okay. Now, is that because of lore reasons, or is that because of gameplay reasons?
It is because of lore reasons, because the exterior of it is just that durable. Obviously,
Okay.
you can use. Obviously, there's a part later on that once the entire squad actually links up, they have to go through and take out some Trandoshan dropships in the hangar. But after they do, they also have to go out and they also are met with a Lucre Hulk battleship. Because the Separatists have arrived and are now. It's now fully aware that the Trandoshans have the backing of the Separatists.
So they show up with their droid-filled donut.
They show up with the Death Donut and show up with the Doom Donut and start blasting away at the Acclimator. And well, they don't initially start blasting away at the Acclimator. They do actually start sending over. They do actually start sending over more of these Foundry pods into the hangar bays. They start deploying these pods into the hangar bays to try to keep control of the ship.
Okay.
And throughout the rest of the mission, you're trying to clear out the hangar bays. And in one part, you Delta Squad is, or at least 3-8, boards a ATTE walker and goes in and starts breaking the pods with that. The mission basically ends where they get word that another Republic warship, the Arrestor, under the command of Republic Navy Captain Talbot, are en route to aid in the clone commandos' call for assistance. The Arrestor and the Prosecutor, after Delta Squad turns the weapon systems back on, are able to drive the droid core ship into destruction. The droids break down, and the rest of the mission ends where they are then given word that they need to head off towards Kashyyyk. Essentially, is what they're told. Essentially, that their aid will come when the efforts to help the Wookiees at some point later becomes necessary.
Okay, so hold on. So 2 acclimators
2 acclimators.
kill a Lucre Hulk.
Yes.
How?
So, one thing a lot of people actually overestimate with the Lucre Hulk is the Lucre Hulk is not originally built as a battleship. Yes, it has a shit ton of guns, and it is probably one of the biggest ships to be developed at the point in time. But it was originally a freighter. Originally, the Lucre Hulk was designed as a freighter ship by the Trade Federation. It was
Yes.
not originally a battleship. It was meant to be a mass bulk freighter.
Yes, which is so that's why they tend to have lots of fighters and stuff in it.
It's also why they have a lot of automated defenses.
Okay. Now, I'm sure my memory's wrong on this. Aren't acclimators
Acclimators
essentially
are
carriers?
acclimators are so it depends on the lore, because there is
Okay.
actually because like I said, there is the acclimator class cruiser, but there is also the acclimator assault ship variant, which is what the prosecutor and the arrestor were.
Okay.
The
Okay.
assault ship variant is meant to be basically a heavy frigate rather than a carrier like the regular cruiser.
Okay.
The Acclimator cruiser was the Republic's carrier and massive like army farrier, because
Okay.
you could hold an entire like army in one of those. And that was why, and that's another thing that Legends does differently with that, but there's a whole thing I'll get into on that later. Well, that's a thing to discuss later. But yeah, no, that's how they're able to overwhelm it, because you have the arrestor coming in from behind the Lucre Hulk, and you have the prosecutor shooting from the fore of it.
Okay.
So you're basically having both of these assault ships hammering it from both sides.
Okay.
So so the droids are overwhelmed, they can't process it right, and the core ship is overwhelmed and destroyed.
Cool.
And that's kind of how that ends up happening. But that's one of the few like one-off bits I wanted to mention. Because there's a lot that we can get into, but a lot of them revolve around the larger tales of the individual commando teams. Um, and the other ones that I'll get into will come up when we start discussing Disney's canon for it. But the last bit that really comes up that's worth noting as far as the history in Legends
Mm-hmm.
is the aforementioned foreshadowing. It's
The
time to
literary
see the
device.
Republic Commandos become the Imperial Commandos.
Cool.
So it wouldn't. Obviously, we know what happens. People have seen the movies. They know all the memes. They know all the clips and everything. Order 66 occurs, and the clone army would go on to undergo the largest organized massacre that the galaxy at that point would see until the destruction of Alderaan roughly 9 years later. Due to the primed indoctrination, the clones' behavior to not question orders, the clone commandos would go on to see much of their once comrade Jedi become the targets between their crosshairs. After many clone commandos would execute the order, they would be reassigned and would be renamed. The reassignment would be under the infamous 501st Legion, otherwise known as Vader's Fist. They were then rechristened
Lame.
as the Imperial Commandos. And for several years, they would be among Vader's top Jedi killers. And some of them, in later at some point later, would also be given a new armor style that I don't know if you have ever seen or not, but they would
Probably
be
not.
later given a dark gray. It is a dark grayish black armor reminiscent of the Imperial Scout Trooper armor. The only difference is it has a lighter looking build and it has a stealth field generator built into the armor. These clone commandos would adorn. Some of these clone commandos would actually go on to become part of the Imperial Storm Commandos, which were basically the same role that the clone commandos would perform in large part. But these were so they were not among the original generations of clones. If you know how you've played Battlefront 2's campaign, the classic Battlefront 2's
Yes.
campaign, you know
Yes.
that when they retake Camino, that they rebuild the Stormtrooper Corps with a entirely new line of clone troopers because of the Kaminoan clone rebellion.
Yes.
And you know that because of that, that is where we get the infamous. You may also know that because of this is where the infamous Stormtrooper aim comes about. Because these clones were very defective in comparison to their original counterparts. The the Stormtroopers that would be born from that from that line would not end up being anywhere near as effective as most of the clones before them were. The Imperial Commandos would obviously join the 501st, and despite their steadfast stance on following orders, there were actually a couple cases where they would outright or they would disobey the order outright or abandon their posting later on due to a lot of the Empire's methodology and practices.
Huh. Okay.
So you had a lot of clone commandos disabandon. You had a lot of the original clone commandos abandon the Empire, and some of them would actually go off to reclaim a lot of their Mandalorian heritage. They would actually seek sanctuary among the Mandalorians during the rise of the Empire.
Yeah, it's because they're no longer teenagers at that point because of their hyper developed growth. They leave that phase and go, "Oh man, you know what? Dad was right."
That, and they also have a few friends amongst the Mandalorians still, because some of them were leading. Some of the Kai actually led a couple strike teams of clone commandos.
Ah, cool.
But that's kind of where a lot of the story for them ends, is with their obvious like departure from the Empire. Those that stay obviously would just be part of the 501st. They go on to, some of them get to become storm commandos, and they get to basically live their lives as, well, they at least try to live lives as normal people.
Now, I thought after the clone rebellion on Camino that they didn't really have clone facilities anymore. So I always thought instead of those being like the next batch of clones, they actually just did what normal militaries do and conscripted people.
Oh no, they did that too, but
Okay.
specifically the ranks of the 501st would be receiving the new lines of clones, because by that point in time, the 501st was the only batch of Imperials still using clone troopers.
Okay. Yeah, they don't want any normals in there, only clones.
And the other part of it was they actually used Boba's template instead of Jango's.
Oh, and Boba's a shitter compared to Jango.
Mm-hmm.
Gotcha.
Well, he's a bit of a shitter, but he does get better. He is definitely worth his own video at some point. Because while he's infamous in his own right, and obviously there's canon and legend stuff to discuss with him, he is definitely still worth his own video as a notable character.
Yes, but he's not as
He is not as
militarily adept as Jango was.
He did not receive a lot of the initial like militant indoctrination Jango did when he was serving with the Kai Dar.
Okay.
Because obviously Jango.
I'm not saying like Boba's bad. I like Boba Fett.
Yeah,
I think Boba Fett's dope, but he's not as trained and well put together as
he is not as experienced as Jango is.
That's the word I was looking for.
Yeah, he's not as experienced, and I understand that. He's not. So that's where the Legends canon that's where the Legends lore of the Clone Commandos ends.
I don't wanna.
We have to, because we get
we could just end it here. We don't have to keep going.
No,
we don't have to worry about canon.
No. We said we were doing this. As much as I hate what they did, and believe me, I despise what they've done to the Clone Commandos. Filoni should fucking know better. As much as he's done good for Star Wars, that man should know better than to disrespect my Clone Commandos like that. If you disagree with
Filoni, you're not a real Star Wars fan.
I'll disagree with whoever the fuck.
I'll sing it from the rooftops. Fuck that guy.
Look, I'm still salty about what he did with Tales of the Jedi. I'm still salty about that. He basically retconned 2 whole freaking books.
I don't even know what that is, and I'm already upset for you.
I was upset by it too. So it's time to touch on. So this is gonna be short. I will make that perfectly clear. This is not going to be. This is not going to be as long as what the Legends lore had. This one is going to be brief, and I'm only going to cover what I've got here. So the story is much shorter for the Clone Commandos in canon. There's really only 2 recorded instances of the Clone Commandos prior to the Bad Batch series and their appearance later in the Clone Wars series. And that's kind of just how short it is.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll obviously cover what happens to them later, but I'll also I can't go into a lot of it because it does tie into the Bad Batch's story, which is going to be its own video later, because at least they are at least one that is worth covering.
Okay.
They're among
I
some
will
of the
preface this.
Disney.
I know next to nothing about canon Disney Star Wars.
If it helps any, the first 2 parts of this is just shit from the Clone Wars.
Okay.
Um,
I will also preface I did not really watch a lot of the Clone Wars.
I am very sorry for you, but you should actually fix that.
I will try. Oh, here, we're fixing it now. You're going to tell me about it, right?
Well, I'm going to give you bits of it because, again, it's not a lot. So, like I said, there's only really 2 recorded instances in canon of the Clone Commandos prior to the Bad Batch. There is obviously a note. One that's not actually like officially shown is the callback of the Clone Commandos of Delta Squad freeing Tarful during the raid on Kashyyyk, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
So that at least is mentioned, and I do like that. They at least make a note like, oh, the Delta Squad wasn't just a one-off appearance. They were actually doing things.
Look, you remember Delta Squad. They're here. Look at them. Look at them.
That's basically what
You
it was. The
remember.
bad part is that's exactly how they're portrayed. Before their actual appearance here, though, a clone in canon, the Battle of Geonosis 0 Hour occurs as not a very eventful note with the Clone Commandos. Clone Commander Pawns, who serves as Mace Windu's clone commander,
Okay.
he acted as the handler essentially for the Clone Commandos during the Battle of Geonosis. Later on, during that same battle, he would have command over a grand total of, you can count them on one hand, 5 Clone Commando teams.
Wow.
Compared to the hundreds in Legends that were deployed, and over 50% of them were lost.
Jeez.
There's only 5 that exist in this batch. Later on, however, they would also go on to serve as basically a deterrent force for any separatist retreaters during the Battle of Christophsis. They were serving under Anakin Skywalker. But there's only really 3 other notable instances prior to the Bad Batch appearance. And their appearance is obviously their own thing. So it's not going to be one I'll mention. The first of these 3 is Delta Squad appearing during one of the episodes of the Clone Wars, where they return to the Jedi Temple after returning the Jedi corpses of Master Halsey and his Padawan Nox, who were killed by the rogue Dark Warrior and would-be apprentice of Count Dooku, Savage Opress,
Okay.
during the Battle of Devron.
She's the one with the cool.
This is the one who replaces her. So
Okay.
we're gonna talk about that at some point when we go into a lot of the Night Sisters and everything.
Okay.
We get to
So I
talk about the
remember
Night
hearing
Sisters
about.
and Ventress and Maul. We'll get to talk about
Okay.
them. Savage comes up as a big piece for Maul's story, especially, but he was to put it simply, he was the Zabrak warrior who Ventress recruited as the sleeper assassin to kill Dooku, essentially.
Okay.
They used Night Sister magics and turned him into a sleeper that would go off to try to kill Dooku at some point later. And he was to pose as Dooku's substitute apprentice until since Ventress had been believed to be dead.
Gotcha.
Savage's first assignment was to kill the 2 aforementioned Jedi during the Battle of Devron. He was sent to go take the temple there, and in order to do that, he had to fight his way through the clones and the Jedi who were guarding the temple on Devron.
Okay.
The other point of this is one of the actual cooler ones, because this is actually our first instance of a new clone commando being introduced. The clone commando being mentioned here is the lone survivor of the squad known as Foxtrot Group. This being the clone captain Gregor. Gregor was the sole survivor of Foxtrot Group and was believed to have been killed in action during the Battle of Suresh. During the Battle of Suresh, he was believed to have died, which was another one of the Republic's big blunders. And he was later found on the desert world of Abathar. He is discovered by one Colonel Meeber Gascon and the entirely droid infiltration team known as D Squad.
These nuts. Go ahead.
Knew you were gonna fucking. But he eventually regains all his memories and attempts to return back to his life as a clone commando, aiding D Squad in trying to escape the planet of Abathar so that they can retrieve the data that they had stolen from a separatist core ship.
Cool.
The ship, the good Captain Gregor, however, would initially be shown to have sacrificed himself, blowing up the massive Rhydonium refinery, which is a basically a fuel reserve, basically a type of fuel, and it's a highly explosive fuel. And so he took an entire
gas, but actual.
It's kind of like it's kind of like in the Clone Commandos game, they actually have a similar thing of it. Was it Fingerescent or something like that? I don't remember the fucking name of the substance that they mentioned, but it was something that the Geonosians in the Clone Commando game, the Republic Commando game, they mention about the fuel and says it's supposed to be highly explosive if shot.
Yep. And then you shoot it, and
Rhydonium was a very volatile. Yeah, it's basically the same thing. Rhydonium is basically your big red barrel explosive.
Okay, cool.
But it's used primarily as a fuel source, mainly to power ships and bases. It serves a similar purpose as Tabana. It's just one of the many like alternative fuel sources. So
gotcha.
But he basically, in an attempt to stop the droids from holding up D Squad any further, he takes that entire damn refinery with him. He blows that entire fucking depot to smithereens in order to stop the fucking separatists from chasing them.
Just like Shepard would have done.
However, it is later discovered that he had actually survived said mission.
Nice.
Our first instance, obviously, that comes up later, but the big part is the next big instance, obviously, is the Bad Batch. I'm not going to go in too much with them. They show up during the Battle of Anaxis. They bring back the clone from Domino's, the basically only member of Domino's squad who has survived at this point.
A lot of lone survivors in the commando units.
The former member of the clone trooper squad known as Domino Squad, Echo. They save him from. They find out that he has survived during the Citadel raid that occurred 2 years prior. And after the Battle of Anaxis, Echo would later join the Bad Batch as a proper member of their squad. He would serve them all the way till well after. He would serve with them and be part of their group until well after the end of the Clone Wars.
Cool.
The Bad Batch go off, do their own thing. They're basically the first of the rogue clone stories that would occur. And they would go on to help further Gregor's story. Because Gregor is among those who actually does not he's not one of the clone commandos who was very adherent when Order 66 came out.
Okay.
Um,
Are we gonna get into the chip?
not really. No.
Okay.
No,
That's
because that's
the dumbest thing I've ever heard. I
it's
hate the
dumb.
chip.
It's dumb. I will have to mention it when we go over the Bad Batch because that's kind of a big thing in their story.
Yeah,
But
that's where I first heard about the chip and went, "Oh, that's stupid."
the Bad Batch's story kind of comes up a lot with that. But when we actually talk about them, we'll talk about the chip.
Okay.
Because I'm not going to mention it here because it doesn't really play a big part. It's just Gregor even makes a note like he's been bashed around and blown up so much that he's already loose in the head. So at that point, he's actually shown a bit that he's come a bit unhinged,
Ah,
but not
he's
necessarily in
become
a bad
defective.
way. Yeah, he's become defective, and he actually reveals that when the Empire starts using the Imperial commandos at this point, the former clone commandos, um, he makes a note that part of their training was done on part of the stormtrooper training at that point, because the clone commandos were the at that point original trainers for the stormtrooper corps.
Yes.
And Gregor makes a note of making sure that their training was purposefully reductive.
We trained him wrong as a joke.
We trained them. We're not going to go training our enemy. But they would actually go on to rescue Gregor from a secret training facility, and later on they would actually go off to. Later on, they would go on to, or at least Gregor, because I'm not going to go too much into what Bad Batch does beyond this point. Gregor's last instance of story comes during the Rebels series, where he goes off to join up with Captain Rex and Commander Wolf well after the Clone Wars had ended. The three of them would actually all fall in with the Phoenix Rebel cell, and Gregor would meet his final fate at the Battle of Lothal.
Yuri Lowenthal.
Fucking.
I'd die in battle for Yuri Lowenthal.
But that is pretty much the history I've got on them. There is some small part that I will give as a rundown of what their equipment consisted of and some of the notable teams that were among the commando squads that they have actually marked down for me.
Cool.
So the clone commandos, I'll run through the legends list first because again, it's shorter. We're going to break it down and then I'll go over the much more expansive and diverse list that Legends has.
Nice.
So the canon list for the clone commandos consisted of the infamous DC-17M blaster rifle, which
Okay,
was
that's the really
it was
long one, right?
no. So I will pull up a picture of this one because this is my favorite fucking blaster rifle ever. Well, that's a poor image. This one actually shows off. I'm gonna pull up image. It's a small image. Never mind. Where's?
What is that? An image for Ant?
Yeah, it's what I'm saying. Here we go. Here we go. We got a decent image here.
All right.
And that is the DC-17M. That's actually with the renders of the model for it from the game.
Oh, okay. It's the stubby one. Okay.
Yeah, this is a modular weapon. It has 2 additional variations: a sniper rifle attachment and a anti-armor grenade launcher attachment.
Dope.
Um, I'll get those don't come up as much with the cannon list. The grenade launcher mod does, but the sniper rifle edition is not widely recognized in this list. They do also note the Clone Commando's infamous Kataran class commando armor, which is a very specialized vacuum sealed suit. It has a personal shield generator attached to the suit. It has a thicker armor build than what most clones have, and probably the biggest distinctions of it are the glowing blue visor and the massive backpack and shoulder pads that this suit wouldn't be known for.
Now the blue visor, that was just because that was special to their helmets,
That
right?
was
So that
special
was
for their helmet because
that was
they had a special built-in heads-up display.
yeah, that's it. Okay,
The Clone
cool.
Commandos helmets had a special heads-up display. You recognize it the most through the video games, but cool part they actually did in Bad Batch was they showed a bit the when Hunter is waking up from having been like when he gets shot up. Essentially, he's woken up having recovered from the shot, and they're being dragged away mid-battle, and you get to see the heads-up display turn on. And you see like the classic Clone Commando. You get to see the classic Republic Commando helmet from his POV.
Hell yeah, that's cool.
It was it was a fun little scene there. One of the smaller nods that I will recognize Filoni did a justice to.
Yeah,
Does not excuse the wider part, but I will give him the credit for that one.
you remember, you remember Republic Commando.
Um, but the Kataran class armor is a very specialized suit of equipment that both instances utilize to great effect. Both of them utilize the DC-17M, the DC-17 hand blaster, which is basically a pocket pistol, basically their pistol sidearm, essentially.
Yep.
A wrist-mounted vibro knife, and I do mean wrist-mounted. This was not like Assassin's Creed where it's under the wrist. They actually had it like just at their knuckle, essentially, and try to they use that as a melee alternative when needing to get in close quarters.
Yeah. What's better than punching? Punching with a knife.
Yeah, it was easily one of the cooler things, but it was also one of the different things because um, made the helmet very messy when you got up and close and stabbed some droids and bugs and everything. Because you actually have the splatter of oil or blood or whatever hit the
Yeah.
visor. But because the commando helmets are really cool, they already had a face wipe.
Which is wild. I'm just imagining a tiny little windshield wiper just attached to the front of their helmet. I know that's not how it actually works, but it's
Yeah,
funnier that way.
it's funnier that way. Um, Another part that the part where the only real part that differs in the canon list is this, and that is the repulsor gauntlet. So this was something that the new Battlefront 2 did when they added the commando as a unit you could play for the Republic.
Okay. I've heard nothing of this, so this is all new.
So what it was essentially was another wrist-mounted armament that basically was a sonic propulsion blast. It was basically a sonic cannon from the wrist. Shot out a
Okay.
big like air burst that knocked enemies away, did a bit of damage, and that was it. But it was something that was mounted to the wrist that normally would be something that at minimum would have to be like a hand cannon. So it
Ah,
was more advanced technology to be made portable. And that's not to
cool.
say that the Clone Commandos didn't have a lot of that anyway, because we get into a lot of the additions that the can the new arsenal adds.
Fine addition to my collection.
So the wider arsenal consists of commas, an E-Web repeating blaster, a wide range of accelerated charged particle guns, or ACP guns, most notably ACP repeaters, heavy repeaters, and shotguns.
Ooh.
These were actually the primary arsenal that were utilized by the Trandoshans that you could pick up during the. Sorry, I'm trying to burp, but it's like not going through. Hate that. But the ACP guns were basically projectile weapons. They were not actually energy weapons like most
slug
weapons were.
throwers.
Yeah, these were actual projectile weapons. And they were fired at such an accelerated rate that they might as well have been um, uh, energy weapons.
So what you're
Because
telling
they
me
were
is
they're
they're rail
basically
guns.
pocket rail guns.
That is wild.
And these were the repeater gun, so the shotgun obviously is one of big note because it's the first one you're introduced to. Because the first one you see is when a Trandoshan slaver has a clone knelt down in front of him as you're crawling through a passage. And you watch as he fucking sticks the barrel right up to his helmet, blows his freaking head off. And Boss just makes a remark about this, like, shotguns? I didn't know anybody used projectile weapons anymore.
Oh, this is called foreshadowing. for when you go to kill Jedi again.
But the the heavy repeater was actually a like portable machine gun. The repeater was an SMG, but the heavy repeater was this massive, like, gnarly machine gun thing.
So it was an LMG.
It's borderline a fucking HMG or a minigun.
Yeah, that's
Let
dope.
me actually see if I can find a image of that one. ACP heavy. Yeah, it's a blurry
I will say this:
image.
the one thing I do enjoy about both Legend and Canon is guns.
Yeah. The firearms of these are very fun.
Give me guns and ships. Those are the coolest parts.
Yeah.
Don't touch
So
the story.
this one is the heavy repeater.
Okay, that looks menacing. Is that a bayonet?
That is a knife at the end of that. That is a
Why would you put a knife at the end of a machine gun?
Trandoshans.
I mean, yeah, but like fucking still.
Because you also have to think, because this was also a weapon wielded by a fucking Trandoshan that was twice your height.
Trandoshans are silly.
They are.
No one seems to understand their dimensions.
So this is the shotgun.
Okay.
You obviously have the slug charges on the side,
Yep.
and you would
Is
actually.
it a pump action with the charging handle
It
on the left?
is. It's not necessarily a pump, but it is basically a lever action with the crank on the left.
Dope.
It was basically a crank. The better way to put it, it was a crank action essentially. You crack the fucking lever up after you shot it to dispel the charge, and you would fire off the next one after it loads in.
Dope.
The last one that I will pull up the image of is the SMG one, which was used by the mercenaries.
That looks silly.
It's a little.
Why does it have a fucking hollow sight on the top? Like, I don't. It's fine. It's fine.
It's fine. It's supposed to be a close quarters weapon, but we know better. It was actually the shotgun is actually one of the better weapons. The shotgun and the heavy repeater are one of the better weapons from those sets, but the arsenal
are always the best,
obviously. But the clone arsenal did also consist of various stuff like The scope of IEDs was one. They had use of IEDs that they would use to basically try to trap enemies in. They'd set like a makeshift explosive on a volatile barrel, and they'd set that up as a trap in the middle of hallways and stuff.
Okay.
Bore bangs, which were basically they're like quick door breachers.
Door banks. Okay. Okay.
Bore bangs is the actual word because it literally it would blow the bolt on a bulkhead door. It was used, you'd set that up on like a light bulkhead door and it would blow the lock on the bulkhead.
Okay.
You had you had sonic detonators, which were a very special kind of thrown explosive.
Mm-hmm.
They were basically this small little like green, almost egg-shaped looking thing. You throw them out. Think like the sonic blasters, but as a grenade.
Okay.
Think like the sonic blasters the Geonosians had, but as a grenade is the best way to describe it.
Cool.
They use flashbangs, EMP and ion grenades, frag grenades, stun grenades. They had a set of ribbon charges, which were basically like specialized shredding charges. I think it's the best way to describe it. It was basically like door strip explosives.
Okay.
They're not as strong as like thermal detonator explosives, but they were supposed to be like able to cover large area, I think was their goal.
Gotcha.
I'm not all that sure about that one, but
Thermal
Geonosian
detonators
4,
will always be my favorite.
they did also use those.
Those are so cool.
They also would make use of the Geonosian force pikes, vibro daggers, night ops armor, TIVs, which I think that was the thermal interface visor. Thermal infrared visor, I think was the name of it.
Okay. Predator vision.
Basically.
Yeah.
It basically turned your heads up display to thermal mode.
Yeah.
They used the Westar 20 blaster pistols, most notably used by Jango Fett. Camino saber darts and Garrett's, which were also used by Jango. They were running around with fucking garrote wires.
Hell yeah.
They had special commando recon droids that they made use of. Remote devices.
They didn't carry all of this stuff all the time, right?
No. This was
okay.
This was stuff
this is a walking armory for each dude. That's too much.
No, so this was stuff that is what would be considered the arsenal you'd see some of them using. This is the common arsenal of the clone commandos' weapons.
Okay.
And this includes a lot of the more non-standard items that the Republic would not initially have, that the Mandalorians actually would train them into utilizing, because they wanted them to have access to basically anything at hand. If they weren't immediately armed, they needed to be trained with stuff that wasn't their initial arsenal.
Correct. Okay.
That was why they had a much wider arsenal than what most clones would. Need to be able to adapt and utilize any tool in their vicinity. Which also comes up with some of the other stuff here. Hydraulic shearing machines.
Of course.
Because fucking crazy door saws. EMP disruptors. Det packs, which were those special explosives that I told you about.
Okay, to blow up the mobile foundry things.
Yeah, so you had the bore banks is essentially your light door breacher, but the det packs were your actual like C4 essentially.
Okay.
AP armored piercing micromines. I think those are supposed to be anti-personnel micromines, but you're breaching armor on droids, so you're doing the same damn thing.
Fair
enough. Thermal detonators I mentioned before. They used a miniature they had a miniature back to tank embedded into their suit. thermal detonator tape, which is basically like thermite tape.
Yep.
Back display, their infamous heads-up display, and lastly, a dampener aerosol that would basically act as like a stunner for enemies. Basically like a super pepper spray.
You got bear mace in there? Yeah, we do.
Bro, I don't just have bear mace, I've got gundark mace.
I was just thinking gun darks. Oh, fuck.
Yeah, this whole arsenal is what would be mainly used, and another small little denoter of their arsenal and some of their mannerisms even comes with the notion of how they actually designed a lot of their armor. So Delta Squad was actually one of the first instances of like specially tailored armor. In
Yeah,
Legends, they were
didn't they customize it themselves?
yeah, they had their suit completely customized and painted themselves.
Nice.
And that was used as a test to not only like it was a special like test essentially that the Kaminoans tried to see how it would work on both their cohesion and their morale. It obviously worked well because many of the squads later would go on to adopt this same ideal. One outlier in that, though, is Omega Squad, who opted to actually have a full matching set of matte black armor.
Edge
They went.
forward.
Yeah, Omega Squad is one of the ones that a lot. That's that other one I mentioned earlier. That when we talk about individual squads, they're ones that we will get into.
Yep.
Another actual note is that on the armors of clone commandos, they would actually utilize some of the to denote their actual rank structure. Essentially, they would have these small like circle pip marks painted onto their armor. 4 pips denoted the squad leader, essentially.
Okay.
3 was to denote the second in command, and the number after would be deferred to however they ordered the squad. And while this was not officially designated by the Republic at all, this was something that was more decided amongst the squad. It was meant to discern the squad order. Who was the squad leader? Who's the second? Who's following up?
Gotcha.
Who's your NCO? Who's your XO? Who's your CO? That stuff.
Cool.
But the smaller teams that they had been trained with was obviously, again, like I mentioned before, something the Mandalorians trained into them to like train them better as a stronger, cohesive unit. Like I said before, I mentioned that they were indoctrinated with the idea that essentially they were each a finger for a hand.
Yes.
Without the hand itself, you can't really do much with a finger. Without that, you can't really do a whole lot. So unless you have the whole unit together, each finger coming together to make the hand, you don't really have. You are effectively nothing without the full unit. Without your full cohesion, you don't amount to your full strength.
Yes.
But on your own, you're nothing. Together, you are everything.
Apes together strong.
They would also act. Well, they indoctrinated this sense of cohesive team groups with the pods, essentially, and the like competition that they would put them through. A big thing that the Mandalorians put together was competition between squads, both to boost their own morale and to boost the effectiveness to try to make sure that they were performing their best.
Yeah.
Another part of this comes in, and this is where they start to kind of fall off a bit, is the Mandalorians actually put them through some insane and traumatic psychological and physical torture to make them resistant to any kind of like interrogation methods. They put them through the ringer and would leave they would leave most of the clone commando units scarred by the training that they had endured to act as to basically power through the endurance of the training there. And with all this together, it made it really hard to kind of accept any law with both the psychological shit that they'd gone through and the obvious pain of the torture and the indoctrination of needing to be a full unit.
Yep.
When the instance of any part of their unit dying came about, if they would lose a brother at all, it was probably one of the most devastating moments they could ever have to endure.
Yeah, they're all trauma bonded together.
Delta Squad actually is another one of those that has a big instance of this. During the Battle of Kashyyyk, or at least before the proper battle, the clone commandos separate to take out a separatist cruiser by mounting on a bunch of anti-air cannons. They use these like high-powered AA guns essentially to blast apart the key structure of a massive recusant cruiser. And they manage to succeed, but before the full unit is able to meet up again, Delta 07 is lost essentially. I'll get to go into more of that when we actually cover them separate, but that's one of the like biggest examples I can throw in.
Gotcha.
But that kind of covers the equipment and the training for them, and a lot of their mentality. But now I can kind of go over some of the more notable squads. So some of the ones I won't go through this full list because it is a lot. I'll go through some of these. So there's Niners Squad, who is one of the other ones that's kind of widely known. Atten Squad, who is another one. The 05 Company, Barden Jisic and Etan Turmakan's battalion essentially is the full list. Arca Company, which consists of Delta Squad, Omega Squad, and Veshok Squad. Foxtrot Group, who was actually part of Obi-Wan's clone trooper legion, the 212th Attack Battalion.
Oh, cool.
That was actually one note I thought about when I was actually looking him over was I actually didn't know that Foxtrot Group was a part of the 212th. I thought that the clone commandos for the longest time were supposed to be like their own individual unit. So that was another thing that I actually got to learn when I was going through all this.
Hooray for learning.
One that actually gets mentioned in one of the comics is Iowa Squad. It's spelled IAWHA. I think it's supposed to be Iowa.
I'm sure it's Iowa, but
there's also Oryx Squad and Ion Team. I think are the only other ones that have any actual note amongst that. There's obviously a bunch of others, but those are ones that I'm gonna throw like names out because they were some of the ones mentioned in the run over of a lot of this. So that's kind of why I'm mentioning them
gotcha.
here and now.
And I'm assuming we'll go into more detail when we do dedicated
episodes to the squads. I'm not going to cover most of them. I'll go over individual one. I'll go over some of the more notable ones like Delta and Omega. I probably won't do a lot of them. The Bad Batch obviously is among the list here, but they're kind of their own special case, and again are one of the ones that will get their own dedicated piece.
Yep.
But that pretty much kind of wraps up the Clone Commandos. That kind of wraps up everything to note about the Clone Commandos. So
Commandos are dope.
after the rundown of their lore here, how do you feel about that one?
Clone Commandos are pretty dope.
Yep.
I do like that they kind of. Okay, I like mostly the legend stuff
Mm-hmm.
because of course I do. But there are
Yeah.
some cool stuff about canon that is also like well done.
Yep.
I will give them kudos. It is well done for some of it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I'm sure we'll get into more stuff about the dumb shit like the chip that I hate. But
Yeah.
I mean, for the most part, like yeah, commandos are dope.
Yeah. We'll
They're
we'll
dope
get.
in almost like every kind of media.
Yeah. They are like special groups like these are supposed to be really cool kind of deal. They're supposed to be like your big poster thing. Like they're supposed to be cool. They're
Yeah.
broadcasted to be cool. They're advertised as cool because they're
Now
the
go ahead.
elite units and whatever. So they're better than the average soldier. So they get to do a lot of the cool things that you don't see the normal soldier doing.
Yeah. Now I will say this. I like the idea. And I think that was Legends where like a bunch of the commando squads died on Geonosis.
Hmm.
I think that is cool, not because it shows like, oh, well, like the commando squads are weak because they're dying, which is what I'm assuming Legend or Canon was like. No, we can't have a whole bunch of them die because they're supposed to be cool. No, that shows to me like they were cool and they died like that because Geonosis was so bad.
It was quite literally a clusterfuck of a fight.
Yeah,
For it being the
like
first for it being as it stated 0 hour, it was one of the most brutal battles on both the for both the Jedi and the clones. Like
yes,
the Jedi had no the Jedi were not expecting to get involved in a war. The clones were not expecting to fight in a conflict like this despite all their training. Nothing could it's even stated like the clones were not initially prepared for what they endured in the simulations when they were thrown into Geonosis.
yeah.
Nothing could
So
have
I
prepared them for live fire combat.
so I think with cannons, like oh, there was only like 5 squads total. Like that kind of takes away from the
From the cool factor of
from the cool factor of like
this like
it's
widespread
bad.
asset being diminished because they were basically lumped in as part of the wider groups of soldier.
Yeah, and that Geonosis was a bad time all around.
Yeah,
With
it
with
was.
with leg with canon, it's more like oh no, like Geonosis wasn't like they diminish the actual battle itself by saying like oh no, it wasn't that bad. That like
Well, no,
we
it
only
wasn't
sent
even
in
that they
like
really
5
mentioned.
groups.
I mean, it wasn't even that they mentioned it was that bad. It's just like they make a smaller note, like, oh yeah, no, the commandos were there. You just don't
Yeah,
really see them. They're there.
like no, I like the idea of like no, they were there, they were all over the place, and then they weren't.
There were a lot of them that just weren't. A lot of them died during that battle. Um,
Like I feel like it diminishes the oomph,
the weight behind it.
yeah, the weight behind it.
It diminishes a lot of the weight and value of the clone commandos presented as what are supposed to be this elite group, but they're thrown in so minorly in canon.
Yeah,
They're thrown together as more like a loose fitting like infiltration team rather than the badass like 4-man army essentially.
yeah,
Like one soldier in a clone commando platoon is worth an entire company of droids. Like
God,
that
it's so
level
cool.
like that level of weight that canon gave them. And I mean that's another thing that Disney did a lot, and we'll probably touch a lot about that in with some of the more character specific stories, because
Yep.
Disney downscaled a lot of characters.
Yeah, they removed a lot of the gravitas of the situations.
And I'll make a note of the one that at some point we will definitely cover because his legends and canon story, while good, the canon representation is one I hate infinitely more than what his Legends one did, and that is General Grievous.
Yeah. Gendy Tarakovsky's General Grievous was the best Grievous.
Dude, best villain introduction ever.
So good.
Like, you
They
have
made him
an
badass.
actual menace. He was a menace. He wasn't just some, like, nuisance that the Republic was having to deal with. He was an actual menace.
He was a problem.
Like, I saw a video at one point that made a note of, like, I think it was what was it, Star Wars Explained? I want to say it was Star Wars Explained or something. Stupendous Wave. It was Stupendous Wave, I think, who went over General Grievous's, like, total body count between Legends and canon. In canon, you can number his body count on 2 hands.
Yeah.
In Legends, it's so much bigger. His Legends body count is infinitely larger.
Well, yeah, because he essentially Dynasty Warriors Musos his way through clones.
I love that comparison. That's great. But yeah, no, it's one of the big problems that Disney kind of created with that
Yeah.
and the separation.
That's okay. That's a thing with Disney in general, though. It's
They
the bad
have
guys have to lose, and because
Yeah.
you do something episodic, he has to lose every episode.
Or at the very least, he has to be hindered in one episode to be beaten in the next.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the biggest issue I have with Disney's running of Star Wars is they don't value the weight of a good villain. Like,
No.
Thrawn is probably the one exception.
God,
Thrawn's
Thrawn
the
is so cool.
And do not get me wrong, everybody, that's gonna be a video in of itself, but that man deserves his own, like, special treatment.
Maybe multiple videos.
That man deserves his own, like,
Dude.
pocket series, essentially.
God, Thrawn is so fucking cool. And here's the thing: I don't know much about Thrawn. Of the fucking what's the name of that series? Dark Empire? No.
Yeah, fucking video
What
got weird there for a second. I don't know
what is the series he's introduced in the book
Rebels.
series?
No, in the book series, it's the Heir to the Empire trilogy.
Heir to the Empire. I've read the first 2 Heir to the Empire books. I've not read the third one.
I have read both of them. I've read both of them, and then I've listened to that audiobook for both of them. I've read all 3 of them, and I've listened to the audiobook. Mark Thompson, by the way, does a phenomenal job doing a lot of the audiobooks on Audible. He is easily one of the best audiobook narrators out there. He does a lot of the Star Wars stuff that has been popping up for Legends. And his renditions for his coverage in both the Thrawn trilogy for Heir to the Empire and the actual, like, new canon Thrawn trilogy, both are phenomenal. He does an absolutely amazing job in every bit he does. But well, the more infamous fan characters will obviously get their own dedicated, like, multi-parters.
Yes, they should.
They'll get their own episodes. They'll get their own multi-parters. But before we wrap up, because obviously at this point there's nothing left to really discuss about the Clone Commandos. It's just kind of the aftermath discussion afterward. But before we wrap up, I had mentioned to you that I wanted you to make one little guess about what's to be announced as our next coverage. And we will be doing this as a weekly thing for everybody. Every Saturday around 12 to 2 will be when we start this up, and we'll run for like an hour, 2 hours to discuss this. Sometimes we may go over that 2-hour limit, but we'll probably never push it to 3.
Well, I mean, I don't know.
It depends on if it's a big topic. Depends on if it's a big topic, but 3 hours will usually be our maximum.
Yeah.
And these will also all get put on my YouTube. Again, this series is still pending a proper name. We're just sticking with the Dark Council podcast for right now. But so I'm gonna give you one little hint about what to expect.
Okay.
What? So before you make that guess, I'm gonna give you the hint and try to give me the guess of what you think it's gonna be. So I had mentioned a couple hints earlier. I will say it is one of the. I mentioned to you that it is a space thing. It was featured in the original trilogy. It was first featured in the original trilogy. The only other big hint I can give is that it is one of the first 2 ships to ever be featured on screen.
Okay. So it's either going to be a Star Destroyer or a Corellian Corvette.
It is, in fact, not just the standard Imperial Star Destroyer, but we're going to get into the entire, the entire line, essentially, of Star Destroyers.
Oh, hell yeah. I love my big Dorito boys.
We get to talk about the giant. We get to talk about the Death Doritos.
Yeah.
That'll be our episode for next week, where we will discuss those. Get to kind of get into the idea of what that definition truly means and all the different classes of them. Get into a lot of the specifics because I like my space stuff. You like the space stuff. Everybody, I think, really likes the space stuff. So why don't you make another freaking space game?
I mean, they made one. It just wasn't good.
It wasn't good. Mm.
I want them to make an X-style flavored Star Wars game.
I would love something like that. Dude, I'll even settle for if they actually go about like remaking another if they even like took the time to full on remake X-Wing and TIE Fighter.
Yep.
If they took the time to go and do that, I would play the hell out of it. No question.
Dude, just give me another Rogue Squadron, please.
Make the entire Rogue Squadron collection. And then, because obviously they only have the first one remastered. They only have the first one remastered.
Yep.
And I feel like it deserves an entire, like, remaster or remake on its own.
Yes.
That whole series deserves one. Because if they're going to go out of their way to, like, remaster ones like Bounty Hunter or even going back to some of the more big hits like Battlefront or Dark Forces, they're going to reach into some of those. They have to at some point. And I do think if anybody does it, it should be the guys who did. It should be the guys who actually went and did the Dark Forces remaster.
Yes.
If those guys
Absolutely.
went and did the Rogue Squadron, they did like a collection remake or remaster of Rogue Squadron, it would be phenomenal. It'd be what Squadron should have been.
Yes. Or hear me out. You just make a new game entirely. Don't do a remake or anything. And just make it Elite Dangerous but Star Wars.
I personally think that at that point they might as well just try to remake Galaxies.
You know what? That's the end goal.
That's the end goal.
Just give me Galaxies again.
Remake Galaxies, Disney. Do it. Do it. You won't,
coward.
But yeah, no. I thoroughly am excited about doing more of this. We'll get to
this is fun.
Yeah, this is going to be a fun little venture. I do plan. I know I mentioned it before. I've been off the streaming game a bit, but I do plan on getting back a bit more over these next couple weeks, especially with Space Marine 2 nearing the corner up. So look out for that when that releases on the early access. Me and Beans are probably going to play it. I don't know if I'll get a third secured to play it, but I know for a fact I'm going to play through that storyline when it releases. And we'll do a lot of the stuff there. So when that releases in the beginning of September, y'all be sure to look out for that. And hopefully soon, we will actually get to wrap up Bolt Gun. I know I put that one off for a little bit, but the the last 2 missions of the DLC were a slog. That was a slog fest. I'm sorry, it was.
Out here looking for the day where he can stop saying the word bolt gun.
I don't get to end that because I'm playing Space Marine 2. I get to just talk about more bolters, bolt guns.
True. But you don't have to associate the word bolt gun with bolt gun.
I just get to refer to the weapon at that point.
That's right.
But
Until they make another DLC.
But we'll hopefully get around to this next week. We'll get to discuss the infamous Star Destroyer, the Death Doritos.
Yeah.
And all of the lore implications and the setup of that role. So I hope you all enjoy this. This will be a regular thing for me. I am shifting my scheduling days, so that's kind of why I'm doing this on a Saturday when I don't usually stream on Saturdays. So
that's fine. It's not for long. It's a couple hours.
We just do it for like 2. It's my usual stream time anyway.
Yeah.
We just run
it. It's not like
instead of just gaming.
We're just talking.
We just get to talk. I get to ramble. I get to ramble on with you about discussing Star Wars stuff. That's kind of just all it is, and it's fun. So
I do like Star Wars shit.
This one's gonna be fun. We're gonna do a couple of these ones where it's like talking about minor stuff. I think we're gonna talk about like more like stuff like what we did with like the Clone Commandos. Obviously we're doing the Star Destroyers next, but we're gonna do a couple of those first, and then I think we'll get into either our first big like character story or our first big event story.
Ooh, I'm excited.
I'll probably do like 1 or 2 more after the Star Destroyer one, and then we'll do proper event or character story.
Yeah.
There's gonna be one of those that I want to do, and I've already got one I want to do early on because he's just so freaking cool. So when we get to him, you'll get to experience that one.
Dope.
But until then, I hope everybody enjoy. Hope you all have a good weekend, and we will see you all next time. This has been the Freelancer and my buddy Jake. We are signing off until next time. Good one, everybody.